Welcome to ABA Generalized, the podcast where we will bring a positive view to the world of applied behavior analysis.
We are your hosts, Erica, G, and Ann, here to share inspiring stories, practical tips, and share some of the latest research to help you thrive in your ABA practice.
Whether you're a seasoned professional, a student, or just curious about ABA, our goal is to spread positivity, foster a supportive community, and empower you to make a meaningful difference.
Every Monday, we'll dive into topics ranging from success stories to self-care strategies and professional growth.
Plus, we'll be featuring interviews with leading experts and real-life heroes in the field who are making an impact with their positive approach.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at ABA Generalized the Pod and send us your thoughts, questions, or success stories to aba.generalized.podcast@gmail.com. Also, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and join us for today's episode of ABA Generalized.
All right. Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to touch on interverbals. So this episode will wrap up the verbal operants. There are we're off to a great start. There are 4 verbal operants. We have already touched on manding, echoics, and tacting. So if you would like to check out those episodes, they are posted. And then there's also an interview that is posted. So go check those out. All right, so let's kind of get into interverbals. I guess we need to start by defining it. Get your handy dandy book out.
All right.
What is interverbals definition?
So interverbals are any sort of like back and forth conversation or responding to questions or, we look at it when we are looking through the movie map as just responding to questions, personal information, specifically is stuff that we might write a lot of goals about, or just trying to figure out. So like if you ask a kid or a person like about community helpers, for example, which one helps you with, or who helps you cross the street, right? Or who takes out your trash?
Or who delivers your mail, like any of those.
Exactly. So interverbals are literally a fancy word for answering questions and having conversations. So the VB map defines it as a type of language whereby a speaker verbally responds to the words of others. They can also interverbally respond to their own words. So in general, interverbal behavior involves talking about things, quote unquote, and activities that are not present. For example, saying bus as a result of hearing someone say the wheels on the bus is an interverbal behavior. Answering questions like, what did you do yesterday, is also an interverbal behavior. So typically developing children emit a high frequency of interverbal responses in the form of singing songs, telling stories, describing activities, explaining problems, and so on. I could keep going on and on about this, but I think that's
I was gonna say, let's just wrap that up there. So yeah, I guess like breaking it down like a little in less textbook terms is like, simple, what Erica said. It's answering questions. Interverbal, wow, words are really gonna be hard for this episode. I apologize, everyone. I was telling Erica, lots going on. What's going on behind me? This is gonna be a photo studio in about a week. Stay tuned. Anyway, so simple interverbals would be like a song. So like what Erica just said, wheels on the bus, or you could also do like animal sounds, so like the cow says moo, or personal questions like what's your name, what's your address, and then kind of any WH question then moving forward from that.
They also say, this also kind of like sparked my I guess like triggered a thought. When you're doing any sort of like math problem out loud, right? Like 5 plus 5 equals, and then they respond in 10. Literally it's asking any sort of question or having a conversation, or like we just said, like putting, finishing a sentence, finishing a thought. I feel like a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people and they're trying to explain a thought and then like you finish their thought for them because they're trying to struggle. Like G and I, we both struggle with words. I mean, Anne does too, but it's just a part of
I guess I should have mentioned at the beginning, it's just Erica and I today. It's going to be probably two of us for a little bit. Scheduling is really difficult this time of year.
Holidays coming up too just doesn't really help anything. But anyways, yeah. So like when we're trying to finish each other's thoughts or anything like that, that's technically an intraverbal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like then moving into more advanced intraverbals, once your kiddo has like the language development and communication and everything, doing more like same and different questions. So like what goes with peanut butter, jelly, or doing like cause and effect questions of, you know, if you go outside in the rain, like what happens? You know, you get wet, or, you know, any type of question like that. Like intraverbals, is definitely a big range of like, you can have very simple, again, songs, personal questions, things that they're going to be hearing every single day, all the way up to, again, more complex cause and effect, actually thinking through the question to answer.
Well, and then, I mean, this book also mentions how, you know, in technical terms, they occur when the verbal SD, so like your discriminative stimulus, evokes a verbal response that does not have point-to-point correspondence with the verbal stimulus. So in layman's terms, it means that you're not giving the same exact, it's not an echoic, right? Like you're asking a question and you're not getting the same.
I think that's important to note, is it's not an echoic. It is a different word than what was asked. They're not repeating anything in the question. They're simply answering that question.
Yep. I know that Anne and I had also touched base on prompting and stuff for our verbal operants, and with verbal operants, you can use an AAC device. This is something you can use, or sorry, not all, words. With intraverbals, you can use an AAC device. There we go. Echoics, we decided you probably can't necessarily. It's like a prompt almost. Like you're pressing the button, they prompt it to, or press it to at the same, like right after. Technically, yeah, okay, you can use it.
But I think echoics, yeah, and I mean, I was not on for echoics, but I know just my 2 cents there too. Yeah, I think echoics is more of that verbal. You're trying to promote verbal language, and also echoics isn't huge into needing echoics in order to communicate. You know, you can communicate with an AAC or with PECs or any of these things. So echoics, I feel like, you know, if you don't have any verbal control at the moment, is not something that the BCBA or supervisor even kind of thinks about. It's all right, we're going to just focus on manding, we're going to focus on tacting. But yeah, Erica, I think you're completely right. Like intraverbals, we can definitely do with an AAC. I have done it with PECs as well. Like, you know, I say it and they hand me the bus of like the wheels on the bus, or twinkle twinkle little star, or the cows, or, you know, moo says and they hand me the cow. So yeah, sorry, just went off on a little tangent, but I agree with you that
no, you're
I think it's a little bit easier for all abilities.
No, I do agree. I think, you know, when it comes to, and we've talked about AAC usage and PECS usage a lot in, you know, the most recent episodes, and trying to make sure that when we're talking about these things, we're being really like using our education with it versus just guessing. But I think that it's important to note that like you can use it for intraverbals specifically. It helps build that language a little bit more. It helps build, you know, that reciprocal, right, conversation too. So as a child or anyone is developing language or growing, right, you are helping them engage in reciprocal conversation. At the end of the day, intraverbals not only help with that development and that growth of having that reciprocal conversation, it helps with social skills too. So I think that's another really important thing to recognize, is that our social skills really come from a lot of the intraverbals that we use.
I agree. And like, I think if you are a new parent, even if your child has a diagnosis or not, you know, you can do intraverbals all day. I know my son is almost 11 months old. That's wild. But you know, we've been doing like rolling a car down, you know, a ramp or whatever and saying ready, set, go. And I just keep repeating that. And, you know, eventually he will repeat go, or he'll finish it. And, you know, I always pause before I say go, you know, give him that opportunity to put language in there. So I feel like intraverbals are very easy to do naturalistically as well. Like you can just do them while you're walking down the sidewalk, you know, do it with a song, pretty much anything out in the world.
I agree. And I think that the more intraverbals that you introduce, the better, you know, your conversational skills may become.
And make them relevant to your day to day. Like if a child doesn't, I don't know, now I'm drawing a blank. If the child's never going to see a certain animal, why are we even practicing it? Like ready, set, go. Like they're going to hear that on the playground. They're going to hear that with their peers. And like, as Erica also mentioned, like that can help socially. Like, I think, you know, if we want to start touching on like pros of intraverbals, it helps social and communication skills. You know, your kiddo then can start to interact with peers on the playground. Oh, this person's racing a car and they're saying, ready, set, go. I can now jump in and say it with them. Or, you know, this group of kids on the playground is singing songs. I now, you know some of those words and I can get in there and participate.
You know what I just found interesting? So I just flipped to the back of this, the VB Map guidebook, and I went to the barriers. And it says that intraverbal behavior is the most complex type of verbal behavior to teach and is the most prone to becoming impaired for children with autism or other developmental disabilities.
Interesting.
I don't know about you, but I think that's like absolutely, I mean, it's very much on par to what we're talking about in terms of like, you know, the social interaction, the social construct to things, right? To make sure that our kiddos are building those skills. But I did not realize how it's the most complex behavior to teach. Because I feel,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it just kind of, I was thinking of some cons like, before we did this episode. I was just, you know, we always go through the notes of pros and cons. And that didn't occur to me until I started thinking of cons. And a lot of the cons I was thinking of are like, it can become like repetitive and you're like almost a robot with it, because now I think when this question's asked by this person, this is what I have to respond. And I actually did have a client, one of my best buddies. One day, like I'll be able to share his name. I haven't really talked to Mom, but one day I will share this bud's name. Anyway, he was my buddy and I was his only technician. I was his first RBT, and I was with him for 2 years. So very well paired. Not a lot of our skills did not generalize though, because I was his only tech. And you know, there wasn't much subs going on or anything. Like it was really just me and the BCBA. So he really became a robot. I would ask a question, he knew the answer, and we'd move on. But I started to realize that he was memorizing things and he wasn't even really retaining all of the information that we were teaching him. So we had to do a lot of maintenance training with him. But the intraverbals, like they rarely stuck. Like the only ones that stuck with him were the songs, but that's because we would sing the songs like over and over and over and over again. So that was the only reason I really think the songs stuck, is that was a preferred. But a lot of the other ones we had to continuously reteach because he lost it. And so anyway, going back to why I went on this tangent is, I think that this is a really complex thing. Because again, even for neurotypical children, like it takes a lot of repetitiveness and like, okay, I have to like learn this skill and then I have to generalize it, which again is tough for any of our kiddos, but especially our kiddos on the autism spectrum. That's, maintaining, and it takes a little bit more repetitiveness.
No, I agree. And I think that it's even more difficult for our kiddos that have things like informational questions that change, right? So like your age changes every year.
Yes.
Address might change. Phone numbers might change. You might like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like other things that change within a kiddo, but like I want to say the hardest thing for our kiddos is to understand that they're not 5 anymore. Or like whatever age they are. Like I'm just thinking of a kiddo that I worked with for quite some time. I worked with he was my oldest kid that I've worked with directly as a BCBA. And he was 16 when I met him. He's 18 now. And
He still answers 16.
It took forever to process that when he was no longer 16, he was 17. And then when he turned 17, I was already starting him on 18 like 2 months before he turned 18. He finally understood 18 and I was like, yes. And he like looked at me like I had like 20 heads. And so like he was like, what, like, why are you excited about that? I'm like, dude, like, because like this is one of the hardest things for you to grasp is like that your age is ever changing. Does he understand that he's 18? I don't know. But the fact of like adding, like putting a different number now to the answer is such a big thing because a lot of the stuff stays the same, right? Like police officer, when you ask who helps you, who keeps you safe, right? Police officer, always the answer. Who takes care of animals at the zoo? Zookeeper. I'm just like honestly having flashbacks to the kiddo also that I worked with in Pennsylvania, who I worked on those questions with as an RBT.
They were fun. They were fun.
But like, you know what I mean? Like those very concrete answers are easier for our kids.
Yeah. And I agree with you that, a lot of the personal questions can change, but for the most part do stay the same. Like, mom or dad might get a new phone number or you might move and you have to work on those, but that's not as often as, every year you do change age and you get older. And I have also had that experience with that question. I had a set of twins, not at our company that we were together. I had another set at my most recent company, and they working on intraverbals and they were really getting it. Their communication and language and everything were really coming along, and they really started to understand these questions, and it was great. And we were like, awesome. And they had mastered probably like 2 months before they had mastered their age. And we were getting closer to the birthday. So, we were like, you know what, let's bring back the question, let's make sure that it's still mastered. And at that point they were 4 turning 5. So we would start asking, they were like 4. And it took a little bit. We needed to like, remind them that this is the answer. And then once they turned 5 and we had to change the answer, it was awful. We spent, I think, 4 or 5 months just, you're 5, you're 5, you're 5, you're 5. And to this day, I've been talking with the mom. I have to ask her what age we are today, because sometimes that changed day to day with them. But yeah, I think intraverbals are definitely helpful, as any other verbal operant is. But I feel like intraverbal is definitely one that can come with a lot of cons as well.
For sure. But no, I do agree, like the fact of keeping things generalized too, with your questions or having it. Like if you ask the same freaking question every single session and don't switch it up and don't, whenever I put a goal in, especially when it comes to like intraverbals or like having conversations, I don't want you to talk about the same thing every single day. I want you to switch it up. Like I've put conversation volley goals in where, you're working on those volley, like back and forth, kind of what G and I are doing right now. We're passing the volley, right? Where like the topic, I'm giving them a topic to talk about, but sometimes it's not always, it's not always changing. They're not always, changing what they're discussing. And so it comes into like that rote response, right? That thing that we really don't want. The memorization of these things. So I think it's really important to switch up how you're asking them, because once again, it can add to like quote unquote scripting, right? And Anne and I have talked a lot about the Gestalt language processing. And so we talked a lot about that in a cohosts. G, are you familiar with the GLP?
I think so.
Okay, so it's basically like what it was actually in, I forget which book it was in, but I was like, oh, well, clearly I have not paid attention to it enough. But so Gestalt language processing, for anyone that needs a refresher, it is when you have, you're recalling something from previous that you're putting into conversation. So a lot of times, like, movie quotes, right? Songs that you've sung before that just kind of fit into context.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. My kiddos were all so little that I never really used, and like we never got this far with Intraverbals. We were really focused on just the simple things.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, continue.
No, you're fine. I think that I forgot where I was going with that in general. I just started to explain it again. But
it's fine.
I mean, I can quote something if you need me to. I don't know.
No, but we were talking about like how it can go into scripting, but it can also be useful. And again, I think that's why, manding and tacting are pretty cut and dry. Same with a coex, like, you're just repeating or saying what the person is, whatever the instructor is saying to you. Mm-hmm. They're very cut and dry. I think Intraverbals has a little bit more complexity to it. It has a little bit more bobs and weaves. You can do different things at different levels. And I also feel like you add a lot of other skills in with Intraverbals. Intraverbals don't stand alone, I feel like, a lot of the time, especially when you're first teaching an Intraverbal. I'm just trying to think of like, we just talked about phone number and birthday and everything. Whenever I've taught a phone number to a client, I've always done a chaining or something along those lines of like, we take it one number at a time depending on where they are.
Or yeah, I feel like kids that memorize their phone numbers after one time teaching them. But I love those kids that do that. Like, gosh, tangent for a sec, not tangent, but like off the track for a second. I had a kiddo that was here. They actually moved away recently. We were teaching him his phone number, and we showed him on his AAC device once, and he was one that he had language, but it was more of that supplemental language was the AAC device. The next session, the tech texts me and like, he memorized his mom's phone number. I was like, wait, what? She's like, yeah, he already knows this. Like mom said she didn't work on it with him within the time frame, like nothing. Child just picked it up. Like, oh, child. But also, I know that we kind of already touched upon about that rote responding, but like forgetting answers to questions is also another barrier for our kiddos. So like when they have to get prompted, so like prompt dependency is so high with Intraverbals because a lot of times our kiddos are not fully understanding and not recognizing, right? So we already talked about, like I said, the rote responding, but the forgetting part of how to answer questions is another thing that's difficult for our kids.
Also, my buddy, that was very prompt dependent.
So talking about prompt dependency, so prompting that you would use for Intraverbals would include, so if you're doing it vocally, without PECs or AACs, you're going to do it with verbal prompting. So like you're going to do a full verbal, partial verbal, indirect verbal. So you can ask the question again, and then obviously independence. Now, if you're doing it with an AAC device or PECs, it's going to be that full physical, that partial physical, that modeling, gesture. Gesture and model sometimes go hand in hand. So it depends on how your BCBA really wants to kind of work on it.
That that needs to be like very specific in the instructional notes. And like, if you are an RBT or a BT, don't be afraid to ask your BCBA for clarification. Like, as Erica just said, like they're very similar and very hand in hand. And it really comes down to like the wording of what you're tracking.
Well, like modeling is going to be like you're showing them again how, like what the response is. Whereas gesture, you're just simply pointing and then leaving it. Like you're not going to linger. Oh gosh, my biggest pet peeve.
Just gesture towards the item. And
I don't know how or why or whatever, but like I guess like in a normal setting, if you want someone to do something and you're gesturing towards it, like you're gonna point to it for a couple seconds, right? Whereas like in our ABA, everything gesturing is literally just like, if they're paying attention, you're going to point to it for a second and then let go. Because if you linger, this is over prompting.
And then that's how they become more prompt dependent. Also, describe with words what you were just doing, because there are people not watching us.
True. Okay, so I held up my phone and I showed, holding your finger pointing to the phone for 3 to 10 seconds versus pointing to the phone for 1 second, as long as they're paying attention.
I was going to say, I think just also making a note that like, yes, I can see if you're hanging out there a little bit longer if the child is not paying attention. But yes, if the child is engaging in what you're doing, a point, let's move on. It's probably incorrect then. If they're not getting it at that point, it's probably, minus anyway, and let's move on.
Just go up the prompt hierarchy. Just help them out a little bit.
Moving on. There's no reason to linger.
Not at all.
But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. I think that kind of covers intraverbals, unless you have anything.
I feel like I don't know why this just came to my mind too, but when we use token economies or making daily schedules with our kiddos, just remember that you are also using intraverbals because you're asking them what they want to do, and you're asking them, what they want to work for. So just being mindful of the fact that you're actually using intraverbals a lot more than what you think. So just because you have a program for it does not necessarily mean that you're not running it the entire session or every single day with your child, your friend, your client, your whomever. We're constantly engaging in intraverbal behavior when, in our group chat, we have a ton of intraverbal behavior there. Whenever we post on our Instagram stories, check us out on Instagram. Whenever we post on our Instagram stories and ask like, hey, what do you want to hear next? Or, any topics or anything like that, that's us engaging in intraverbal behavior. Sometimes, And
then we get put on extinction real quick. But extinction for another episode. But yeah, I think we covered, as much as we can about intraverbals. Just kind of recapping. So intraverbals is answering any question. You probably use it more naturalistically teaching than you think. There's lots of pros in terms of generalization social skills and communication. It is a little bit harder to generalize intraverbals, and you can kind of become a robot if, it's not done correct. I don't even want to say it, not done correctly, not done carefully is how I will put it. But yeah, we are definitely looking for more people to interview. So if you feel as if you have something to say about ABA, we'd love to hear it. We are open to all things ABA. So parents, caregivers, teachers, other ABA workers, whoever. If you have an experience with ABA, we would love to hear from you. Other than that, we will see you next time where we will start something new. We're done with verbal operants. On to something new. Goodbye.
Bye.
ABA Generalized, the podcast, is not providing professional advice. Please seek a professional in your area for specific advice and support.